A gram of fructose causes more weight gain and more fat deposition than a gram of anything else, including fat.
Good afternoon, everyone, and to our dedicated viewers. My name is Niku. I'm the Director of Operations and Corporate Development at Emery Pharma. It's an honor to have Dr. Lustig back with us today. He's our legendary speaker, and we've managed to bring him back here today. And while he doesn't need any introductions, I really wanted to still give him one because he deserves all the hype. Dr. Lustig is a pediatric endocrinologist, a best-selling author, a globally renowned speaker. He's committed to educating the public, and he's been working with different experts for childhood obesity and metabolic impacts of sugar on processed foods. He's a professor of emeritus at UCSF. Dr. Lustig has authored over 180 peer articles and reviewed over 85 of them, focused on biochemical impacts of excessive sugar and fructose consumption. In addition, he has authored several influential books, such as Fat Chance, The Hacking of American Mind, and Metabolic. Through these resources, we've continued to learn a lot in our personal and professional lives. So we are thankful to have you today. This is his sixth visit to Emery Pharma, so we're honored to learn more. And please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Lustig. Thank you.
So as Niku said, this is my sixth time here. And, you know, there's always a consistent theme through all the talks that I've given, and that is that diet matters. And today, diet matters also, but you're going to see some other things matter too. And those things are impacting on our children in a big way. And, you know, I'm going to ultimately present to you a new idea on why we have this obesity pandemic that we have. And you'll see that it actually encompasses all the data that are out in the literature, answering all the weaknesses of the various models that have been proffered thus far. And it also allows for us to understand what the preventions should be. There are no treatments, there are only preventions, and you will see why as we go. Okay? Everybody familiar with the movie? All right, well, so the out is more than the up, so, but you'll see why. So here's the obesity curves for adults, and you can see that we've extended it over these past 2 decades because things continue to get worse, as you can see. And here's for children and adolescents. You'll notice that actually for children, there's been a little bit of a stabilization because we've instituted all sorts of preschool and toddler programs, like getting juice out of daycare, as an example. And it has actually relatively flattened the curve for toddlers, which is good. But you'll notice everyone else is still going up. So it's still a major problem, but you will see why in a moment. Here's the biggest problem we have. Everybody wants the pill. And there is no pill. And you could argue with me, yes, it's not a pill, it's a shot. Is it? Is it really? Okay, is this really the answer? Well, number one, the cost is breaking the bank and will ultimately devour all of Medicare, Medicaid, and every aspect of health care delivery in America within the next 5 years, if we continue on this route. And turns out, doesn't help everybody. It actually only helps about 2/3 of the people who take it. And 1/3 of the people who take it have to stop it for side effects. And as soon as you stop it, all the weight comes roaring back. And the reason is because Ozempic is not dealing with the cause. It is dealing with the symptom. Okay? It is like basically hypertension. You are treating the high blood pressure, but you're not treating the cause of the high blood pressure. The cause of the high blood pressure is still there, and so it is still wreaking havoc because the problem is not being addressed, only the downstream effect. So This is not the answer. We ultimately have to find the preventative. As Desmond Tutu famously said, if you see people falling into the river, you don't just fish them out of the river, you find out why they're being pushed in the first place. So it is true that obesity is a complex problem with multiple inputs. I don't argue that. It's not one thing, it's many. It's energy intake, it's energy expenditure. We will talk about those in great length in just a moment. It's partly genetics. Okay, the heritability studies say that about 50% of obesity is genetic. Okay, so it's not like that's a nothing. On the other hand, you can't do anything about the genetics. Okay, they're fixed. And they haven't changed in the last 50 years, but environment sure has. In fact, our environment is completely and totally obesogenic at multiple levels, and we're going to talk about many of these in just a moment. And of course, there are all these lifestyle factors which are ultimately preventable, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Assortative mating. Yeah. In other words, fat people marry fat people. That's assortative mating. Okay. All right, there are two prevailing models of obesity that are out in the zeitgeist currently. There's the oldest one, which is the energy balance or the calorie model, which has basically been with us since 1902, since we discovered the concept of the calorie and the concept that food actually had calories in it. This was done by Dr. Wilbur Atwater, basically developed how to determine the amount of calories within foods by exploding it in a bomb calorimeter. The problem is we are not bomb calorimeters. Okay, we do not run off heat. Bomb calorimeter basically measures heat. We unfortunately measure ATP. Okay, they're not the same. Okay, so the whole concept of calories is, as far as I'm concerned, part of the biggest problem. And my goal and my job is to, quote, kill the calorie, hashtag kill the calorie. Okay, that's my job. Okay, but nonetheless, this is what most people in this country and this world believe. Obesity is due to overeating because a calorie is a calorie. So if you eat more than you burn, you will gain weight. If you eat less than you burn, you will lose weight. Therefore, it is about calories in, calories out. It is about two behaviors, gluttony and sloth. Therefore, if you're fat, it's your fault. Therefore, diet and exercise. Therefore, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. Therefore, the food industry says, don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. All of those come from the notion that calories are fungible based on the energy balance model. That's where this comes from. Remember, it is a model. And as George Box famously said in 1976, famous British statistician, all models are wrong, some are useful. The question is, how useful is this model? And we're going to get there. Now, the energy balance model also, since the advent of leptin, dictated that the brain is responsible for the control of weight gain, through this phenomenon called leptin resistance. Now, I'm a great believer in leptin resistance. I'm one of the people who first identified insulin as an antagonist of leptin action. So I have a lot invested in this concept of leptin resistant and that the brain controls weight gain. After all, I am a neuroendocrinologist. That's what I do. Having recognized its failings and its shortcomings, I have moved on from that. And you will see how and why as we go. Then there's this second model, and you've probably heard of this model. It is called the carbohydrate-insulin model. Okay? And what it says is that insulin is the primary driver of adiposity. There is no fat gain, there is no weight gain without insulin. Insulin is essential, and we know this because all you have to do is look at type 1 diabetics and how much weight they lose and how much fat they lose, because there's no insulin to push on the adipose tissue in order to get it to increase its size. Okay? And that is also true. So the goal is keep your insulin down. Well, what makes insulin go up? High glycemic index carbohydrates, and in particular sugar. So This says that it's not how much you eat, but rather what you eat. That it's not the quantity of food, it's the quality of the food that matters. Okay? And that insulin is the primary driver of fat cell storage and also cell division. And those things are true. The question is the model true? Okay? Again, all models are wrong, some are useful. How useful is the carbohydrate-insulin model? Okay, so this is the energy balance model in a simple schema. Here's overeating, here's physical activity, here's energy intake, here's energy expenditure. They increase circulating metabolic fuels, which then lead to fat storage. But the problems are here. Old news. All right, is this model supported? And the answer is, well, yeah, but it's also refuted. The support. It is possible to lose weight on a variety of diets. That has been shown by numerous investigators, okay? Suggesting that if it doesn't matter what kind of food you eat, just eat less of it, that calories do count. Also, we know that consumption of ultra-processed food does cause weight gain because it causes overeating, because in fact, sugar is addictive. And so if sugar's in everything, well, that's why you eat more, therefore it's still about calories. So the support says. But there are a whole bunch of challenges. There are a whole bunch of refutations to this model as well. Here's one. For any given caloric intake, BMI was higher in 2006 compared to 1988 at any given BMI. It doesn't address this concept of developmental programming, which we have learned in pediatrics is extremely important. This concept that something is going on in utero. Okay? Weight loss does not last because the body defends a set point. If it were only about calories, that shouldn't be true. Exercise does not induce weight loss. It induces fat loss, but induces muscle gain. But if you're burning more than you're taking in, you should lose weight, right? Well, it turns out that's not true, right? And there's plenty of people who gain weight without overeating. This has been documented 50 ways from Sunday, particularly those people who are stressed. So here we're looking at energy intake. Notice essentially no change since 2000. It's not like we're eating more, but the obesity rate's still going up. Okay, here's the the energy, the total energy available. It hasn't changed either, per capita. Okay, but obesity sure has. So this energy balance model does not fit the data, except everyone believes it. So the question is, when is the data enough to make people stop believing it? Well, when you have something better, that's when. Okay? When you can change your belief system based on something that's more rational. That's how. All right? And we're getting there. We're getting there. So now let's look at the carbohydrate-insulin model. So let's start with insulin. What does insulin do? Well, it regulates storage of metabolic fuel. That's its job. It is the energy storage hormone. Insulin makes fat. More insulin, more fat. This is an axiom. You can take this one to the bank. Okay, the question is it the cause of obesity? That is a different question. Okay, it does stimulate fat synthesis and deposition, and it does inhibit fat oxidation. It pushes on the fat cell to keep the cell from releasing its fat. Therefore, more insulin, less chance of being able to lose weight. All those things are true. The question is, does insulin cause obesity? That's a different question. So, does insulin cause weight gain? Well, increased insulin definitely makes you hungry. That has been shown. Again, 50 ways from Sunday, you infuse insulin, you get hungry. It activates receptors in the brain. We know from people who are over-insulinized with diabetes that they all gain weight, and it's one of the reasons why teenagers with diabetes don't take their insulin, because they're afraid of weight gain, and they all end up in diabetic ketoacidosis, one of the banes of my existence as an endocrinologist. We know that insulin-secreting tumors, insulinomas, cause weight gain. Okay, and there are a whole bunch of genetic variants that affect insulin secretion. And in fact, if you have a defect that increases insulin secretion, you will gain more weight. And if you have a defect that reduces insulin secretion, you will gain less weight. So all of those things are true. And decreased insulin action leads to weight loss, like for instance, under treatment of type 1 diabetes, diabetic ketoacidosis. And we have the adipocyte insulin receptor knockout models of Ron Kahn at Joslin to demonstrate the mechanism by which insulin exerts its effects on adipose tissue, okay, known as the FERCO mouse, the fat insulin receptor knockout. These are animals that can't gain weight. They are very lean, and they stay metabolically healthy because they don't respond to insulin because the insulin receptor in their fat cell is broken. Okay, so it's all very interesting. All right, so this is the schema for the carbohydrate insulin model. High glycemic load, carbohydrate, lots of sugar, leads to insulin secretion. That causes changes in circulating metabolic fuels, just like we did before. That also leads to fat storage on its own. And that ultimately, because of the increase in deposition, that leads to the increase in hunger. Everybody see how that's different from the energy balance model? Yes or no? Okay, you see the logic and the difference in logic. So these two models have been duking it out, I would say, for the past 15 years. Which one's right? All right, so here's the support and the refutation for the carbohydrate insulin model. So we know that ketogenic and low carbohydrate diets promote weight loss more effectively than low fat diets. We know that. We know because they keep insulin down. We know that inhibition of insulin secretion increases weight loss in those patients who are obese who are dieting. And we know that the current Western diet is highly insulinogenic. We know all those things. All those things are supportive of this. But there's some challenges. There's some refutations too. This concept of developmental programming. How does that work in utero? Why is it that we have an epidemic of obese newborns when they don't diet and exercise and they're not eating excess carbohydrate? High glycemic index processed foods have many new ingredients, and those new ingredients may have their own effects. So it may not just be the glycemic index of the carbs, it may be some of the other things, like for instance, artificial sweeteners. And adipose tissue fat storage can occur without carbohydrate and can occur without increase in insulin because there are other things that drive adipose tissue too. So these are the things that get in the way, and these are the things that the different investigators will bring up as being issues for either one whenever these things are, fought about. There was a big meeting in 2022 in London over this whole thing, and everyone went home with a headache because they didn't solve a damn thing for all these reasons. Okay, so if we compare the two models side by side, okay, the drivers are slightly different. Here it's caloric content. Here is specifically insulinogenic content, okay? Ultimately, positive energy balance comes before adipose tissue storage. Here, positive energy balance comes after adipose tissue storage. And you might say, like, who cares? Why do we care? Well, ultimately it does matter, because if this is the correct model, it gives us something we can do, like get rid of the sugar. If this is the correct model, it relies on everybody to do their own thing, which is what we've been doing, and it hasn't worked. So policy change is contingent on which model is correct and which model any given society adopts, which is why we are in this conundrum that's not getting any better. Most recently, David Ludwig, who's a proponent of the carbohydrate insulin model, and by the way, full disclosure, I was a proponent of the carbohydrate insulin model for 15 years and only recently have changed. Okay, he and Thorkild Sorensen in Denmark have basically tried to conglomerate the two to try to placate all the critics. And this is their integrated model that they published that basically says you can come in on either side. Okay, so maybe that's true too. Maybe it doesn't matter. Or maybe for any individual person, one might matter more than the other. But here's the conglomerated because here's this, and they both end up in the same place. Maybe that's it. But there are problems with that too. So here's one of the problems, two of the problems. Okay, they're on this slide. This is a paper that was published in 2020 looking at records of people all the way back to the Civil War to determine body temperature. And it turns out that body temperature, white or black, male or female, no matter what the age, has been declining for the past 150 years. We produce less energy at rest. We give off less body heat at rest than we did 150 years ago. This cannot be explained by either model. Neither model can explain how come you're generating less body heat, because body heat's coming from the mitochondria. And all of these other models have nothing to do with the mitochondria. But very clearly, the mitochondria are very important, because otherwise, why would our body temperature be going down? Duh. Problem number two. These are not humans. These are lab animals. These are animals in captivity eating the same chow they always did, and they're gaining weight as well. If it's about the ultra-processed food, why are the animals eating the lab chow gaining weight also? Unless they're exposed to another stimulus that we're also exposed to that has nothing to do with the food. Everybody with me here? Having fun? Am I stretching your brain? I will tell you, my very first job in science as a freshman in college was taking rats' temperatures.
Oh.
And
Okay.
it's a good thing I'm not doing that
I
anymore.
know.
Yeah.
Because we know how it's done.
1974, Richard Wertmann's lab at MIT. Yep. All right, so that's one set of problems right there. A second set of problems. We have an epidemic of obese 6-month-olds. They don't diet or exercise. In fact, we have an epidemic of obese newborns. They don't diet or exercise. So 4 different studies, South Africa, Israel, Russia, United States, all show a 200-gram increase in birth weight. And when you stick these newborns in a DEXA scanner, that 200 grams is all fat. So we have an epidemic of obese newborns, and they don't diet or exercise. So any hypothesis that you want to proffer to me about what's the driver of the obesity epidemic has to be able to explain these two things. And the energy balance model and the carbohydrate-insulin model don't answer those. Critical periods have to be accounted for, and prenatally, the in utero environment is a critical period, and neither of the two models currently out there address either of these questions. Okay, so nutrition, stress, and environmental chemicals can affect weight gain across the lifespan, including in utero. Development may be actually the most sensitive time, and both of these models exclude that, don't even address it. The critical periods are not considered in most of the models. So we have to factor in these two phenomena that occur prior to birth. Epigenetics, that is, changes in the methylation status of individual genes and or proteins to alter their function that might be unrelated to diet, or might be related to diet, we don't know. And developmental programming, where you actually change how cells respond based on their prior exposure. Now, we know that there's this thing called developmental programming, okay? I wrote a book about it, edited a book about it, okay? I had one chapter, there were 25 chapters, okay, called Obesity Before Birth, Maternal and Prenatal Influences on the Offspring. So this phenomenon, this issue, okay, you may have heard of. It is called the Barker hypothesis. And the Barker hypothesis was developed by David Barker back in 1989, when he noticed that in the city of Southampton, England, Those individuals born during World War II had more diabetes and got sicker and died at younger ages than those residents of Southampton prior to that. He then went back and looked at birth weights, and it turned out that all of these people who were dying younger and earlier with diabetes and metabolic syndrome all had lower birth weights because it was World War II and because food was not plentiful. Okay, this has since been looked at in other cohorts, like for instance the Dutch hunger winter in Amsterdam. Okay, showing the exact same thing. So this Barker hypothesis is now a thing, and it's developed. It's turned into a specific branch of medicine called the Developmental Origins of Health and Disease, also known as DOHAD. And so the question is, does DOHAD explain what's wrong with the energy balance and the carbohydrate-insulin models? That's where we're going. Okay. So we have data to confirm that DOHAD, that this problem that Barker found, is relevant to coronary disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and obesity, all consistent with this thing called metabolic syndrome. Okay? And here's just some of the data that Barker found. Okay? That the birth weight was the most important thing for risk for disease later. This, of course, is now, in the zeitgeist. This was a Time magazine article about epigenetics. Okay, this whole concept of the first 9 months, and now we've got this thing called the first 1,000 days, because we realize that it actually extends, to 2 years after birth. That this critical window, okay, when things happen. Okay, it alters the epigenetic programming of cells and tissue via alterations in growth factor and hormone concentrations, which I'll show you in a moment. It results in changes in gene expression and protein regulation, which we call functional alterations. These lead to tissues that look normal but are metabolically not, that they actually don't act like normal tissue, and that these changes actually persist. They don't go away once things go back to normal or back to baseline, okay? And they can ultimately lead to altered susceptibility and decreased lifespan. Okay, everybody with me so far? So a bad start lasts a lifetime. That's basically where this comes from. One of the things that is particularly egregious in that first 1,000 days are exposure to toxins that alter metabolism. And we call these endocrine disruptors because they bind to endocrine receptors that ultimately impact how cells function later on. And there are a lot of them. Now, there are 300,000 chemicals in commerce. Okay, approximately 150 of them have been designated environmental obesogens. That is, they cause increase in fat. And the question is, could this be driving this phenomenon that we see prior to birth? And could this even be driving the obesity epidemic that we see having nothing to do with food? That's one of the questions. Okay. Now, we know about mutagens. Those are old news. We know about all this stuff in cancer. But this concept that some of them might be obesogens is relatively new. Okay? Well, turns out there are a lot of obesogens. Okay, and here's a list of them. And by the way, somebody was on all of these papers. Okay? So, bisphenol A, you're familiar, it's in your Target receipts. Okay? It's in your flooring. It's in plastics like baby bottles and like binkies that you give to newborns. Okay, it's in personal care products like parabens, like cosmetics and hair shampoo. It's in food preservatives, like I said, BPA and others. It's in pharmaceutical drugs lead to insulin resistance, like for instance atypical antipsychotics. Clothing and furniture, PBDEs. Okay, the flame retardants that you dress your kids in, okay, have been shown to have this effect. Electronics and chemicals, PCBs that are in your piping in the tubing in your house. Organotins, they paint tributyl tin on the bottom of ships, boats, to keep barnacles from attaching to the hull, so they're in all the food and all the water, okay, all throughout. Okay, so the question is, could these things, these chemicals that have effects in the dish that promote adiposity be actually driving obesity in people. Microplastics have been certainly implicated in that. You've all heard about microplastics, okay? This just came out, by the way, like a week ago, this paper, okay? And you can see the place where there's the most obesity has the highest amount of microplastics, Fiji. Highest obesity rate. How about that? And Bahrain, okay? And American Samoa, and Nauru, and Tokelau, and the Cook Islands, okay? Big time microplastics and big time obesity, okay? In all of those Micronesian islands, okay? And you can see here, okay, this is, what is this one? This one is the intake, and this one is the what kind of food. And you can see China's a big issue also. Now, why do these work? Well, there are different places where these obesogens could be affecting endocrine hormonal communication and metabolism. It could be occurring at the fat cell itself, it could be occurring at the pancreas, it could be occurring at the liver, it could be occurring in the GI tract, it could be occurring in the brain. And the reason is because there are a whole bunch of transcription factors that respond to these different chemicals to alter cellular metabolism. And in many cases, those changes in cellular metabolism never go away. So when they happen early on, they're fixed. So here are adipose tissue transcription factors, and you can see the agonists that promote it. Here are, that's all adipose tissue. And here are hormones. And you can see the different tissues that promotes, okay? So basically your adipose tissue is entirely dependent on the chemicals that they're exposed to. And those chemicals are everywhere, and they are going up, not down. And those obesogens can cause all of the phenomena and all the behaviors that we associate with obesity. There's data to support every single one of these. And all of these have been associated with obesity. So the question is it the obesity or is it the chemicals? These are the questions, okay? Well, one of the questions, if you're going to prove causation, is you have to show precedence, okay? Precedence determines, risk for causation. If something follows something else, it's not a cause, it's a result. If something precedes something else, it might be a cause. Well, here's the change in obesity, and here's the exposure to all these chemicals. You can see the precedence, okay? And they tend to stick around. So even if you try to get rid of them, you can't. The perfect example of this is DDT. So everybody's familiar with DDT, the very first insecticide. Okay, it is an estrogen. The reason it works is because it's an estrogen. It interfered with the life cycle of the insect. And we used DDT until 1972. And the reason we stopped then was because Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, came out in 1962, and it took 10 years before anybody actually paid attention and said, maybe Rachel Carson's right. And we got rid of DDT in 72. Well, I hate to tell you, but I can measure DDE, metabolite of DDT, in all of your urine right now. And we ourselves, through a program at UC Berkeley, which you may have heard of, called Chamacos, which is the children and mothers of the children and mothers of Salinas, Chamacos. We showed that the amount of obesogens in DDE in pregnant mothers' urine predicted obesity in the offspring 5 years later. Another one that's a big one that you've all heard about is PFAS, right? This is Teflon. Okay, you notice there are no more Teflon pans anymore. Okay, and anybody see the movie Dark Waters with Mark Ruffalo? Came out in 2019. It's all about Teflon. It's all about how DuPont tried to cover this up for 20 years. Okay, point is, it's an obesogen by itself. May also be cancer mutagen as well. Okay, so here's a sampling of different chemicals that we're exposed to that are related to obesity, that are environmental obesogens, at least in the dish. Now the question is, are they true in the human, and are they clinically relevant? Everybody with me so far? okay, and how relevant this question is to our obesity epidemic and how it might help explain the differences, between the energy balance and carbohydrate-insulin model. Everybody with me in terms of, the debunking of this? Okay, so here's a whole bunch of things. Okay, these have no calories. No calories here, all right? These have no calories here. These maybe have calories, like that one. So you say, well, it's a calorie, so it can't be an obesogen. Oh, yes, it can. Because if it causes more weight gain or more adiposity than its caloric equivalent, then it's still an obesogen. And that's exactly what it is. It causes more adiposity than its caloric equivalent. Okay? A gram of fructose causes more weight gain and more fat deposition than a gram of anything else, including fat. Okay? So, do we have human data that implicate obesogens? Well, yeah, we do. We have lots. Okay? We have data on phthalates. We have data on BPA. We have data on BPS, bisphenol S. We have data on air pollutants. We have data on DDT and HCB. Okay, so we have a lot of data in humans that this actually matters. So could obesogens actually explain why diets fail? So in the pounds lost study, was a 2-year randomized controlled trial where they looked at all these different diets against each other. What you can see is, yeah, there's a little bit of weight loss here, but then they all gained weight, and they all gained weight at about the same rate, irrespective, all the way through that first year. And the question is why? Well, within that pounds lost study, PFAS levels predicted greater weight gain and greater adiposity and greater decline in basal metabolic rate. So could this be one of the things that's in our environment that's leading to these changes? So obesogens, weight gain, and all the things in the middle. Okay? So interfering with hormone signaling pathways in this that wasn't in this before. Because after all, these hormone signaling pathways have a lot to do with the development and the growth of adipose tissue, as I've shown you. Okay? And so then you end up with the fat storage and you end up with the weight gain. So in essence, it's coming in at the carbohydrate-insulin model because it's leading to the fat storage before the weight gain as opposed to the other way around. But it's coming in through a different pathway. Okay? Now, support and refutations. Is there support? Well, we have in vitro animal and human studies. We have developmental adult exposures causing weight gain. We got that. And we have human exposure to a variety of obesogens across the lifespan. I've shown you all of that. How about the challenges? All right. We need biomarkers. And they're hard to come by for obvious reasons, because you can't biopsy somebody's amniotic membranes, and get away with it, among other things. Okay, so these are hard studies to do. They're always after the fact studies. So you can look at, pregnant mother's urine and look at what happens later, but you can't necessarily know that the two are, related. It might be prospective correlation rather than causation. These are hard studies to be able to ferret this out. Okay? Lack of data showing the effects of obesogens in clinical type studies for obvious reasons, because you can't do random exposure to obesogens. IRBs won't let you get away with that. That's kind of, not allowed. And there's a lack of data showing decreased exposure causing lower weight gain, because everyone's exposed maximally. Okay, so we have a lot of questions. In particular, we are very interested in this potential mechanism, which may actually tie the food to the chemicals to the calories. And it is the redox model of obesity. So this is a model of obesity that no one talks about because it's hard. It's complicated. And I'm going to make it as simple and as palatable as I can make it. But what it basically says is that every cell in your body is an autocrine system. That is, it responds to changes in the internal environment. And every cell makes reactive oxygen species. Every cell makes redox reactants. And those redox reactants then alter the function of proteins, particularly enzymes, particularly kinases, within the cell to alter how energy metabolism flows within that individual particular cell. Okay, that's the concept of redox model of obesity. Okay, that there's a normal response to fuel in terms of quantity, and that increases ROSs transiently because mitochondria make ROSs as a matter of course. And then those ROS signals the rest of the cell to store fuel because there's too much ROSs, basically like a servo mechanism saying, hey, lots of ROSs, therefore too much fuel, therefore store, because ROSs are the readout of increased metabolism. Everybody got the idea? Because your mitochondria make ROSs. 90% of the ROSs in your cell come from your mitochondria. Therefore, if you're making ROSs, you must have a lot of fuel. Therefore, ratchet it down. Therefore, put it somewhere else. Therefore, store it. Concept, make it understood, okay? And that ultimately leads to triglyceride synthesis in adipose tissue. And that an ROS signal is inappropriate when the fuel is normal, but not when stimulated by an outside stimulus, like, for instance, an obesogen. That it can mimic the ROSs, and that the ROSs are driving adiposity exclusive of the fuel because of the ROSs. So any way you get to ROSs is a problem. Everybody got it? That's the concept, okay? So food consumption changes mitochondrial ROS amount, which can lead in the pancreas to insulin secretion to try to clear, can change food intake in the brain to try to stop eating, and reduces liver gluconeogenesis, all leading to nutrient storage. And we have data to show that there are redox regulators that ultimately impact on all of these tissues, on the liver, on the gut, on the brain, on the fat cell, on the pancreas, the whole axis. And redox has been shown, changes in redox has been shown to alter changes in those organs' physiology to promote adiposity. So that redox signaling might be the driver of the adiposity itself. Then you look at, well, are there obesogens that generate redox? How about all of them? Well, not all of them, but a whole bunch of them, okay? Most obesogens increase reactive oxygen species. Here's a list, okay? So you can see that these obesogens are not benign. They are doing stuff, and the stuff they're doing is not good. What has the most redoxes? The most reactive oxygen species? What generates the most? The answer, ultra-processed food, because it has the most environmental chemicals and the most fructose. And fructose is a particular driver of ROSs, okay? Now, normally you would try to get rid of the ROSs, and here are the three enzymes that get rid of ROSs. Superoxide dismutase, glutathione peroxidase, and catalase. They're all being affected negatively by these obesogens as well. So, what has changed in our last 50 years? Well, the entry in the food supply of all these chemicals, and our increased carbohydrate, and our overeating. In other words, all these things have changed, and they all work through redox, through increasing ROSs. So that's the way to conglomerate the energy balance model and the carbohydrate-insulin model and the obesogen model into one model using ROSs and redox potential as the intermediate. Everybody got it? Okay, so UPF, obesogens, all lead to redox. Here are the phenomena that come with that, and then you get all of this at the end. The point is, this is not just an academic exercise, and the reason is because you could do something about this, okay? You could prevent it. You can't treat it, but you could prevent it. So ultra-processed food and obesogens both change redox potential within cells, that the ROSs constitute a misleading cellular signal. It's mimicking energy sufficiency when there's not. And that's causing energy storage when it shouldn't. Okay? that the redox couples are transported amongst cells via the circulation. So when one cell type has a problem, other cell types will have a problem. And the ROS and redox changes impact function in an organ-specific manner. So for instance, it'll affect the liver in one way by leading to increased gluconeogenesis. It will affect the pancreas in another way by increasing insulin secretion. Okay? And the increase in ROS is the driver of the hyperinsulinemia, the hyperlipidemia, and the increased appetite. All right, is there support for this? The answer is, well, yeah, the circulating redox state becomes more oxidized with age and with disease. We know that. The changes in redox response to fuel consumption are well documented. We know that. And ROSs impact cell function in an organ-specific manner. We know all of those things. Does that answer the question? Well, thus far, this model is largely untested. And so we are going to develop a study along with our colleagues at UC Davis to actually try to have a redox lowering diet to see how that works. Okay, and documentation of removal of relevant chemicals could alter this. Well, there's your preventative. Yeah. It has been shown to actually increase methylation. Yeah, ROSs increase methylation like crazy. All right, so if you integrate all these together, the diet and obesogens basically act similarly because they alter redox potential through different mechanisms, but nonetheless alter redox potential. And it's the redox potential that changes how each of these cells function, leading to weight gain. So basically, here's your diet, here's your obesogens, here's your interfering with hormone signaling, here's your ROSs, and here's your energy balance in your carbohydrate-insulin model. So maybe they're all correct, so that we don't have to have a fight between the two, but that they're all correct through this phenomenon here. Well, then that would give us a window into obesity prevention. We know that ultra-processed food is obesogenic, and we also know that ultra-processed food has obesogens in it, okay? And we also know from Kevin Hall's work at NIH that when you give people unprocessed food, they lose weight versus ultra-processed food at the same concentration and at the same composition, and they gain weight, as you can see here. So EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, are hard to clean up. But there's one ROS generator we can do something about tomorrow. What is it? Fructose. Because the food industry put it there. All the others are hard. All the others are hard to take out. All the others are in the water. They're in the air. They're hard to deal with. But fructose is a primary obesogenic substrate, a primary obesogen, a primary ROS generator, and it was put there by the food industry. So for me, this is where you start. And here's just data to prove that. So if you take a test tube and you add some albumin to it, and you add either glucose or fructose to the test tube, and you cap it with parafilm, and you put it in the sunlight, and every day you come back and you put the test tube in your spectrophotometer, here's how fast the glycation reaction goes with glucose, here's how fast the glycation reaction with fructose goes, and every time, so it's 7 times faster, and every time that reaction occurs, you generate an ROS. Okay? So there are many more ROSs from fructose than there are from glucose because of its stereochemistry, because of its innate nature as a molecule. We know that fructose inhibits mitochondrial function. It inhibits it at AMP kinase, it inhibits it at ACADL, and it inhibits it at CPT1A, all of which lead to adiposity, possibly through redox. And here, this is definitely through redox. So this is the methionine choline deficient rat, okay? The MCD rat, not the McDonald's rat, but it might as well be, okay? And the reason is because methionine is the methyl group donor for glutathione, which is the hepatic antioxidant, and choline is the cofactor for the production of phosphatidylcholine, which is the method for lipid export out of the liver. So when you don't have glutathione and you don't have phosphatidylcholine, the fat stays in your liver and doesn't move. Okay, so it's the fastest animal model to NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, that there is. Right? So one of our GI fellows, Michael Pickens, working with Jackie Marr at San Francisco General, did this study many years ago now, looking at what do these different diets do. And so here's methionine choline sufficient, sucrose and starch, notice no change, sufficient. Now methionine choline deficient, sucrose and starch. Notice starch, no problem. It's only the sucrose that was a problem. And look at all that fat. Okay? And look at all the tunnel staining, all the dead cells, all the necrosis. We're talking about developmental windows, right? Well, here are the 10 worst children's cereals. Okay? This one down here, Fruit Loops. Okay? Number 10, only number 10, but 41.4% sugar. This is what's in the National School Breakfast Program breakfast. Okay? Love Honey Smacks at 56% sugar. That's why they dissolve when you pour milk on them, because it's just sugar. Okay? How about this? Here's my daughter, when she was in 2nd grade, showed me this. She said, "Dad, you're not going to believe this." She brought back a carton of Berkeley Farms 1% low-fat milk, 130 calories, 15 grams of sugar, all lactose, which is fine. And here's Berkeley Farms 1% chocolate milk, 190 calories, 29 grams of sugar, high fructose corn syrup's the second ingredient. Again, National School Breakfast Program breakfast. And most importantly, what is the largest fast food franchise in America? Our nation's public schools. Subway, Starbucks, McDonald's, when you add them up, doesn't even come close. There are 18,000 of these. There are not. There are like 9,000 of all of those. How about infants? Why we can't resist it? Because it's addictive. And we know it's addictive. Anybody ever work in a normal newborn nursery? Anybody know what this is? This is called Sweeties. Sweeties. It is a 24% super concentrated sucrose solution that you stick in the normal newborn boy's mouth before the circumcision. Releases dopamine and opiates. The Jews have wine, everyone else has Sweeties. And young children prefer sweets. So here's adults, here's children, here's sucrose, sucralose, aspartame, it's the same. And here's potassium chloride as the control, not the same. Doesn't matter if it's a 3-point scale or a 5-point scale, ultimately it's the same thing. Babies have sweet receptors and they don't have other stuff. That's why they don't like, Indian food. Sorry, Sandeep. later. Okay, like it later. All right, well, this is what they put in the commercial infant foods. So they say that there's no added sugar. That's the claim, but in fact, there's plenty of added sugar. They just don't call it sugar. Okay? And could this be the reason for obesity in 6-month-olds? Here's Isomil, okay? Standard lactose-free formula. What's in it? Well, corn syrup solids, but this is the thing right here, 10.3% sucrose. Coca-Cola is 10.5% sucrose. It's a baby milkshake. And it leads to the exact same thing. And worse yet, Nestle actually spikes its infant formula, Cerelac, in countries with poor people to get them to drink more. And there's fructose in breast milk. We were always told that fructose does not cross into breast milk. Oh, yes, it does. Oh, yes, it does. Absolutely. And you can actually see it right there. There's the fructose in the breast milk. And the level of fructose predicts the weight, the lean mass, the fat mass, and the bone mineral content. You're growing babies bigger. Why do we have 6-month-old obese kids? Well, here's one reason. And how about in fetuses? So maternal fat mass predicts changes in genes that are involved in early metabolism, and obesity and metabolic disruption leads to changes that carry on. Here's your developmental programming. And you can actually see the changes. This is a rat study, but the same thing happens in humans. And you can see here's a control diet, a high fructose diet. You can see that the fetal weight's down, the placental weight's up. Okay, and you can see here the placental diameter and the fetal placental ratio are clearly altered. And you can see here's the labyrinth being smaller, whereas this decidua are bigger. Okay, it's changing the fetal placental unit because of the sugar in the mother's diet. And ultimately, this leads to changes in SCD1, one of the enzymes involved in liver lipid metabolism, SREBP1, which is sterol regulatory element binding protein 1, which is necessary to make triglyceride, and UCP2, uncoupling protein. Maybe this is the reason why everybody's body temperature is going down, because uncoupling protein is what makes the body heat. Okay? So, Michael Pollan famously said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. I have a problem with all of those. Eat food, well, some people need a low-fat diet, others need a high-fat diet. That doesn't help a whole lot. Not too much doesn't take into account mitochondrial dysfunction. And mostly plants, just remember Coke, Doritos, and Oreos are all plant-based. So it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food and what they did to the food in particular. Okay? And in my book, Metabolical, I suggest 3 principles. Feed the gut with fiber, protect the liver by getting the sugar out, and support the brain with omega-3s and getting rid of like mitochondrial toxins like cadmium and arsenic. Okay? So the science is actually clear. Less sugar, more fiber, more omega-3s, and limit the emulsifiers which cause inflammation. That's called a real food diet. Okay? So you will hear people talk about food as medicine. Well, food can be medicine, but food can also be poison. Okay? If it has mitochondrial toxins in it, it is poison. And it has obesogens in it, it is poison. And these are things that are not routinely thought of as poison, but they are because they're interfering with normal physiologic functioning and generating adiposity instead of allowing for ATP generation. So with that, I will close, and hopefully, I'm happy for the input and feedback on this notion of redox as the intermediate between diet, obesogens, caloric balance, and carbohydrate-insulin as the driver. That's what we think is going on, and it provides us with a set of preventative measures we can take if we want to, and it starts with sugar. Questions?
Great, great summary, Rob. But as I was listening to this, I say, can we essentially say that the bullseye sits at the mitochondria?
Oh yeah,
right.
I've been saying that for,
I know. So because
for 5 years now.
The idea here is that obesogens, right,
Mm-hmm.
persistently could be mitochondrial toxin. The
Absolutely.
data on body temperature is indicative. Right? The data on catalase, superoxide dismutase, which is promoted by the mitochondria, is showing about that. So the question is, this is an interesting debate. How best can we start to figure out mitochondrial function in modern society?
Yeah, well, right now, mitochondria are barely even taught in medical school. It's a problem.
And everybody's ignoring it.
And everyone's ignoring it. So not everyone's ignoring
No,
it.
everybody.
Well, so I've already told Monica and Sonia there is a book that you, in particular, have to read.
Yes.
It just came out 2 weeks ago. It is currently the #1 New York Times bestseller nonfiction. That's how fast this thing rose to the top, in 48 hours.
Wow.
Okay. The book is called Good Energy.
Yeah.
And it was written by my colleague and good friend, Dr. Casey Means, who was a Stanford ENT resident before she realized that she was actually doing more harm than good by operating on all these patients with inflammation, and gave up and quit 6 months before her residency was finished to devote her life to actually fixing the problem. And she wrote this book, and it is phenomenal. And you of all people,
No,
must
absolutely
read it.
got it. No,
Must read it.
it's a
It's
must
all
read.
about the mitochondria.
And one of the parts that comes to mind is that the two I's we constantly ignore is very basal inflammation,
Yep.
right? Which can exist in obese patients,
Right.
right? We never, and the effect on immunological dysfunction that relates to it, that further aggravates the situation.
Absolutely. And it's
No, I mean, just
and it's likely that the
fascinating,
immunological dysfunction is also an energetics issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on what you talked about, which was the hunger changing, the starvation of infants and starvation of people in particular, because now there's this emerging thought in India, which I've not researched to be fair, but they're talking about the fact that Indians, South Asians in particular, have a lot of metabolic diseases
Yes.
like insulin
Without
resistance.
obesity.
Without obesity.
Without obesity, that's right.
And in fact, some people are, their BMIs are low. They are actually on the almost starvation scale.
Right.
And they're saying
And they're
it was
still sick.
probably caused by the famines that were created by the British.
Possibly.
Several famines were
Because
created
this carries
over.
forward. What
Right.
we've learned about epigenetics is that it will carry on 4 generations into the future. At least 4, possibly more, but at least 4. The person who has done the best and most work in this, there are 2. One is at Washington State doing animals. His name is Skinner, Michael Skinner. And the other person who is a good friend and a big proponent, and I love him to death, okay, and he's a very colorful guy because he always wears Hawaiian shirts to everything, is Bruce Blumberg. And he's done all the work on tributyl-10 and actually shown the mechanism in terms of how the enzymes are being altered. And so his work has been just revolutionary and phenomenal. Those are the 2 people I would refer you to.
70s, 80s, there was a big epidemiological study done in India called the thin fat syndrome.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So
Tofu.
that's pretty
Thin
well
on the outside,
established.
fat on the inside.
Yeah, that's very well established in that, particularly in the sub-Asian
Right, absolutely. So the point is, how do you explain that? Well, here's how you explain that.
That's what exactly.
Here's how you explain that.
When you're talking about it, makes absolute sense.
That's right.
When it comes to obesogens exposure, how does prenatal and early childhood actually differ from the adult? Because I assume each of these age groups are actually exposed to different obesogens.
Yeah, so obesogens could actually alter neuronal connections within the brain while they're developing. This has actually been shown through the leptin story by Rich Simmerly and Sebastian Bourret at USC, showing how it will actually alter hypothalamic connectivity and development to foster obesity because of altered neural signaling later, because appropriate synaptogenesis did not occur in the organs and at the time when it was necessary for the critical window. Now, if obesogens do the same thing, and there's no reason to think they wouldn't because of how they work, then you could see how that would also occur as well for the same reasons.
Okay, and I have another question around leptin actually.
Yeah.
Has there been a study where the relationship between reactive oxygen species and leptin resistance is like, the mechanism is studied?
That's a good question. I haven't seen one yet. That's a good question and important question, but I haven't seen an ROS leptin resistance study done specifically for that.
It just shows what the industry is doing with GLP-1s.
It's not helping.
It's criminal in a way.
I don't know if it's criminal, but it's...
Well, it is, because what you're really doing is taking a very high-priced drug. I mean, this is how the industry works, right? From
Right.
everything, immuno-oncology to GLP-1s, it set the expectations,
Well,
and then suddenly you have these side effects.
well, the point is you're still treating the symptoms.
Right.
You're not treating the cause, okay? GLP-1s are very effective symptom treaters,
Right.
but they're not treating the cause.
But also the thing is the whole issue of satiety. I mean, I looked at it 15 years ago, and at that time we walked away from GLP-1 agonists.
Well,
Yet the industry comes right back to it.
Well, the delayed gastric emptying is not to be ignored. I mean, it is a big problem, okay? And I'm on record on that.
Rob, the world is washed with microplastic and plastic. Every time, I look at, I'm very concerned with trash separation, plastic, recycling. Obviously, we have a problem we're doing much better in this country. California is doing a lot better. But the rest of the world, if you go to, say, Indonesia, you go to Malaysia, Philippines, it's China, it's a mess. And where do you begin? This is like
I wish I knew. I'll tell you where you begin. You begin at that which you can fix. I don't know how to fix the microplastic problem. Okay, I just don't. But I know how to fix the fructose problem. So I start there. Okay?
A week ago, I read an article where they did a study on cadaver testicles, males, from 16 to 84 years old, that were harvested in the mid 2010, 15 area, and they all had microplastics.
Yeah. Well,
All of them.
entirely possible.
Which tells you, so again, remember.
Is it
that's-
related to sperm count? Is it related to
Exactly.
fertility?
That is
Are
the
those
reason. So you have two
microplastics?
issues.
Those microplastics clearly contain obesogens.
Exactly.
Could they be having
So
a,
the sperm
and
count is going
estrogens
down, yeah.
and estrogens in the testicle, estrogens in the prostate, alter testosterone levels, all possibles.
Exactly. And
All
to your
possibles.
point,
Don't know.
I don't know how we get out of this. I mean,
I don't know how to get out of that.
yeah, plastics
Okay,
are-
but I will tell you that if we had to add up what is the biggest contributor, sugar is the biggest contributor. Okay, and that we could fix.
So, yeah.
Okay,
So-
that one we could fix.
I mean, Rick Johnson, you know.
Yep, I know him well. He's a good friend.
we-
We're going to New Zealand together
Yeah,
in
no, I was
November.
talking to him today. So they did a study where they gave 10 healthy people Coca-Cola, 2 a day, and within 10 days they were all pre-diabetic.
Yeah, right,
All 10 of them.
right. Why are we surprised?
No, nobody. But the point is, yet sugar, carbonated drinks.
Well-
we give it to our children. We give it sitting around.
I just went to Congress. I just testified at Congress last week, a week ago yesterday, about this issue. And I will tell you that I was surprised at who the detractors were. They were the Democrats. Because they didn't want to take the soda away from poor people.
Right.
If the problem were caloric deficit, if the problem were caloric scarcity, that might make sense.
So that's one of the things.
But it's not.
You should listen to his podcast that you did with Stanford, where you very clearly enunciated a calorie that you eat is not quite the calorie.
That you burn.
And isn't that where you talked about almonds, right?
Yeah.
Where,
I've
no,
talked
it's-
about it many
it's
times. I
an
talked about it
amazing
this morning.
It's an amazing story. That's what the idea here is that. And nowadays, every restaurant has like 480 calories, 700.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. 'cause
Means
it's
nothing.
Calories are irrelevant.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
Calories
suddenly,
are irrelevant.
we're making choices based on that number.
I'm trying to kill the calorie. To me, that's when I know I will have been effective.
Yeah.
When we lose the calorie as a unit of measure in this story.
What, in your opinion, is the measure then?
Well, grams of sugar would be a better start, but ultimately I think it's going to be redox potential.
Yep.
But most people are not
And there are,
educated or literate enough, right?
I know we've got a long way to go.
Long way. I mean, these
Long
are
way to go.
areas.
But the thing, even if you got the
Well, who
fructose
educated
on it-
people on calories? The food industry.
Yeah.
That is true.
Because it worked for them.
Yeah.
But if you said fructose and you put it in a circle, red circle like tobacco,
Yeah.
and said a
Yeah.
slash through
That would be a
it,
good start.
right?
That'd be a start.
I think labeling.
Well, it's a place to start. People know that sugar's a problem. They didn't used to, but they do now. Okay, I have data
Not if
to
you
actually.
go to Starbucks, by the way.
No, not Starbucks, but there's a public relations arm of the food industry. It is called IFIC, IFIC, International Food Information Council. Okay, it is PR for the food industry. They every year publish a report, and every year they ask the public a question. In 2011, they asked the public this question: what is the consumable that causes weight gain? And back then, only 11% of respondents said refined carbohydrate or sugar. Okay, almost everyone said a calorie is a calorie, or I don't know. They asked the exact same question 7 years later in 2018. with the exact same phraseology, no change. And now, 7 years later, 33% of the respondents said refined carbohydrate and sugar. And an equal number of people were subtracted from a calorie, I don't know. So that's proof that education has occurred in those intervening 7 years. Education can work. The problem is education alone has never solved any substance of abuse. You have to pair the education with a policy directive. All right? That is what we haven't done. So education is necessary, but not sufficient. We need policy, which is why I went to Washington. And you can watch my testimony. It's on the House Appropriations Committee website. If you want, I'll give you the URL for it. Okay. In fact, if you want, I can play it right now.
Rob, I think education, as you mentioned, is really the key, even for the most educated of us. We consider carbohydrates as carbohydrates.
Right.
Everything falls under carbohydrates, whether it's glucose, fructose, sucrose,
maltodextrin,
galactose, cellulose, everything is carbohydrates.
Right.
But what matters is that there are differences between these carbohydrates.
Right.
And
so if I could do one thing at the USDA, if they gave me like carte blanche for one day, what I would do, I mean, at Congress, I would get rid of the food subsidies. That would be my one thing to do there. Get rid of all food subsidies. At USDA, if they gave me carte blanche, I would do one thing. Right now, there are 3 macronutrient groups: fat, protein, carbohydrate. I would expand that to 5 macronutrient groups. And here are the 5: fat, protein, refined carbohydrate, fiber, and sugar/alcohol. Because refined carbohydrate affects you one way, fiber affects you a different way, and sugar/alcohol affects you a third way.
So would you put complex carbs where?
Refined carbohydrate. That'd be refined
You don't
carbohydrate.
think there's any complex carbohydrates?
Huh?
It's all refined.
Well, I mean, look, at some point, it becomes the law of diminishing returns.
Right.
Okay, I think those 5 would help solve a lot.
But
of
you
questions.
do need some carbs, though.
No, you don't. You don't need
what
any
about how
carbs.
do you manage protein glycosylation process?
Oh no, because you can make glucose from amino acids and fat, and that glucose will.
Glucose that goes into glycosylation, right?
Well, sialic acid, but your body makes that too.
Sufficiently.
Yeah. So it's basically glucose, galactose, mannose, and sialic acid, and the body makes them.
Eskimos don't
Eskimos, don't have carbohydrate.
have carbohydrates in their diet.
They did fine.
Now they do.
Now
but
they do, and now they're sick.
Now that's a problem.
And now they're having
Now they're
diabetes.
sick. Right. William Stephenson, famous Arctic explorer. He didn't go to the North Pole first, but he went to the North Pole most. Okay. He was my mother's late husband's brother-in-law. Okay. William Stephenson's Harvard chair is in my office at my house. Okay. I own all of Stephenson's books. I have his entire library. And he was shipwrecked amongst the Inuit in 1914 and lived amongst them for a year and a half. And he noticed that Eskimos at the time, now Inuit, there was no diabetes and no cancer. And he ended up writing a book in 1939 called Cancer, a Disease of Civilization. In addition, in 1928, he and his explorer partner from that fated shipwreck checked themselves into NYU Bellevue and basically lived there at NYU for a year. And they ate nothing but meat for a year. And at the end of the year, they were healthier than the doctors.
I mean, it's true now that, cancer is a metabolic.
Yeah, cancer is a metabolic disease.
People have come to it lately, but it is true.
Yeah, Tom Seyfried got that right. And because of mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah. And still a lot of people push back on it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Anyhow.
Thank you again. Let's give a round of applause.